So, Christian, in my role, I ask a lot of questions and you and Samantha respond to them. But what are some of the things that we should cover today while we're at the top of the hour that is also critical to this conversation from your experiences?
I think, first of all, encouraging people, that encouragement to seek out mental health services. Samantha referenced at the beginning, 50% of people who really could benefit from mental health treatment don't access it. There's a lot of reasons for that. So really talking about destigmatizing mental health is healthcare. And the more that we can get that message out there, the more it enables and empowers people to do those things that are going to be really beneficial for them.
But
So that's probably the biggest one.
what about people using sometimes mental health as a crutch and exploiting it and taking advantage of it, Christian?
Well, I think that I'm always hesitant to call it a crutch or exploitation. I think we don't know what people are experiencing. We don't know their lives until we walk in their shoes. I think I tend to view things from a very strength-based perspective and saying, hey, so what can we do? So if this is really hard for you and these are the reasons that you can't do something, let's really try to focus on what you can do. And sometimes when you can encourage folks to start in that regard, it's less of a struggle for them to do what they need to do.
Well, Samantha, I've seen people who have used mental illness as an excuse to seek out benefits, and you call them out on it, and then eventually they admit the obvious. Not everybody who's crying mental illness is in need of mental health care. I mean, it would be interesting to know what policy changes are critical to improving access to mental health here in our country, and how these political platforms have evolved into addressing these mental health issues.
Sure. So firstly, depression is actually the leading cause of disability worldwide. And I think that we need additional infrastructure and foundational support to address mental health. Oftentimes, mental health is grouped into overall health care, and it's so important to separate mental health from that overarching umbrella. Mental health needs to be its own entity. There needs to be more services, more benefits, increased health insurance coverage. And it's so important for everybody to know what mental health benefits they either have or they need.
Christian, you know what my biggest concern is today? I don't think we've seen anything like what we're going to see depending on who wins this year's presidential election. Because both sides that are loyal to each other think that the other is an existential threat to our democracy. And people have even mentioned that America is so fragile now that we could be on the brink of a civil war. But I think the civil war is that people believe that if either candidate wins, it's the end of civility. And so in what ways could this election outcome shape the mental health in the future, and how should we prepare ourselves to embrace this?
Well, I think first, referencing what Samantha just said, access is key. And so in order to embrace and to be able to kind of deal with what's going to happen, folks need to have access to services. I don't know what the numbers are right now, but at one point in the middle of the pandemic, I mean, some of those psychiatric appointments were 14, 16 months out before people could get in. If somebody was trying to get psychological testing, sometimes those wait lists were over a year long. And so when we think about the mental health of Americans and people needing that support right now, we need to have those supports in place. And so in order to be able to prepare and to be able to support people in whatever happens with the election, we need to have resources and we need to have places where they can go and get the help and support that they need.
Samantha, I think one of the biggest issues that is overlooked in this mental health discussion is that when parents are in conflict in the home, when kids are in abusive situations, when kids are left alone. I think what is often overlooked is the mental health of our children, the depression of our children. When we talk about this mental health in these presidential elections, we like to talk about adults, but what about the little babies, the children who are so impacted by this?
That's such a great point, Armstrong. I actually have a 13-year-old son, and before I got on this call, I asked him one of the key things that I was overlooking is how is he feeling with this election cycle? As you just stated, 7 out of 10 adults are actually experiencing election anxiety. There is something called election stress disorder. And like you said, it not only affects adults, but it also affects children. And my son's words verbatim, when I asked him about what his fears are relating to the election, was that people were going to hurt other people and the amount of violence would increase. And that is a very real threat that I think children are afraid of.
Do you think, stay with that point, that mental health services should be prioritized at the same level as physical health care?
Absolutely. I think that mental health is just as important as physical health. And oftentimes we neglect our mental health because it's not always something that we can notice on the outside. However, physical health and mental health are so closely intertwined. 40% of individuals who have depression or a mental health issue also have a physical issue, such as cardiovascular disease or metabolic disease. And the two oftentimes do go hand in hand.
You know, Christian, I just had this thought. You know, I know immigrants and open borders is a huge issue in this election, but man, those families being torn away from their homes, crossing those waters, separated from their kids separated from their parents for months in a strange land that's unfamiliar to them. What about their mental health? Because their mental health is going to eventually impact ours.
Absolutely. You think about children and you think about children not having a voice or children being torn apart from their families and childhood, those attachment styles, how we engage with the world, how we learn to trust people happens in childhood. And so when those needs aren't being met or addressed, those issues go into adulthood. It's not as if somebody turns 18 and they've had a really tough childhood that all just goes away. So very much a lot of concern for those families at the border who are being separated and those children who are not with their parents anymore.
What are the most common barriers preventing people from using mental health services today?
I would say that health insurance is one of the most common barriers from individuals utilizing health insurance. Either people lack health insurance benefits or their health insurance benefits lack adequate mental health coverage. And as a provider who accepts insurance in my practice, we see that way too frequently, in which somebody will have very limited health insurance benefits. They either have to pay out of pocket for mental health or their health insurance reimburses providers at such a low rate that providers are very skeptical and hesitant to accept and enter into contracts with those health insurance companies.
Christian, what are the most common barriers preventing people from using mental health services today?
I think what Samantha just talked about, insurance is a big issue. I just wanted to kind of add what she said. Sometimes people do have mental health coverage, but they have an astronomical deductible that they just can't afford to access these services or treat their mental health. Stigma is another issue. There is still sometimes this mentality that we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we shouldn't be out there asking for help. But the reality is people need people, and mental health issues can be treated. Those seem to be the two biggest barriers that I've run into with folks throughout my 30 years.
What demographics, Samantha, do you find, what living conditions, a work environment, or professions where you find where mental illness has the least impact? What is it about a person's life that sort of protects them and helps them to adjust quickly, and mental health does not impact them in ways that it does most people around this world?
I would say that there are marginalized demographic societies in which they are either not open to discussing mental health, or there still is that stigma with asking for care. In our practice, we've actually seen an increase of the LGBTQ youth community come in and ask for mental health services because of everything going on with the election and because of the stress involved. That demographic seems to be one of the most affected populations just in terms of this election cycle that our practice is seeing right now.
You know, Kristen, there's a lot of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation. And many people get bent out of shape and really go into overdrive based on information that they embrace, that they consider to be fact. Because there are a lot of services out there that are experts at whipping people into a frenzy, bringing about anxiety, and causing them to do and react to things that this is not something that they would normally do. How do we fight against this disinformation?
I think first and foremost, having resources and having folks available to talk about the misinformation out there, having people in our lives who can kind of challenge maybe some of our beliefs, maybe even very gently. I think that one of the biggest issues that comes up is, our brains are designed to protect us. That's what our brains do. So when we see misinformation and we see something that could be considered a threat to our own well-being, we are going to latch onto that and really look at that, and it's going to bring up more fear for us. So if we can also get out some information about how the brain works, Samantha did a great job doing a very brief explanation of fight or flight. And that's what's happening a lot of times when people see misinformation, they grab onto it because they want to be able to protect themselves. We don't like uncertainty as humans, so we will grab onto anything that we feel like gives us a sense of certainty, whether those facts are incorrect.
I cannot thank you and Samantha enough for what you do every day. We have no idea the lives you impact, pulling people away from the cliff, being there as a bridge between families, and providing them the mental health that they need. We need more people like you in the world, the compassion, the experience, not being judgmental. You accept people where they are and take them where they need to be. And I appreciate what you do. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, Michael and Simon will join us to talk about immigration and the border. Again, thank you for what you do, and we look forward to having you back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll be back.